So thank you everybody for joining us today. As we are preparing for the conference in Paris, we are organizing this webinar with Laura DiCarlo here, Head of Growth at Quadmark, that will share us great knowledge on how to build your pitch in 7 steps. As I can imagine, many of you are preparing your pitch for the conference, so I really hope this will be helpful for you. And yes, thank you so much, Laura, for also supporting us along the way, also with other projects, and we really appreciate you.
That's okay. It's a pleasure to be here on this, what is a very sunny Wednesday morning. I'm based in the UK in the Southwest. So yeah, if anybody's ever in Devon, then please do look me up. It's always great to meet fellow Weebies. So as Sonia said, my name's Laura. I'm the head of growth here at Quadmark, and my role is really twofold. It's part marketing and part business development. So I spend a lot of my time networking, meeting potential clients, and also pitching for new work. During this session, we're going to use a software called Slido, so we can have a little bit of interaction and some polls. So if you've got your phone ready, there'll be a QR code at some point to join that, so that would be wonderful. And as I said at the beginning of the call, and for anybody who's just joining, I will share the slides with you after the session. My LinkedIn details are there as well. You can see them at the bottom. So please do connect. And for anybody who's in Paris, yeah, I'd love to meet you all. The only other thing to say is it's quite hard for me to manage the chat. So Sonia is going to manage the chat. We'll take questions as we go, depending on time. We may have to stop taking questions towards the end, but do keep putting them in the chat. If there's anything we can't answer, I'll take away and get back to you after the call, and hopefully there'll be some time at the end. So a little bit about Quadmark before we get going. You might be wondering about who we are. Not many people have heard of us. So Quadmark is a training and enablement agency, and we generally work with large companies. And I guess we're
كل مره نعمل بشكل يعني الفرق بين اللي جابهم المره اللي فاتت والمره دي بجيب نفس الناس.
Wait, sorry, I just yeah, great.
Thank you. And so we're slightly different in that we don't just train these companies' employees, we also train their partners. It could be people that they sell through. We also help train their customers, and yeah, anybody else that they may want to educate on a wide number of things. So the training that we do is always bespoke. And it's bespoke because the challenges we get asked or our clients facing are all very different and unique, and depending on what they need and the goals that they're trying to achieve. And as I said, we just train on anything that you can imagine, whether that's product sales training, onboarding for HR teams, if they're growing and wanting to onboard new employees. It could be manager training, and we also do a lot of sales enablement training, which is a bit of a ... into why I'm here talking to you today. And so some of the framework that we're going to talk about comes from the sales enablement training that we've rolled out with clients over the years. We're a kind of medium-sized company. We've got 100 learning specialists, writers, designers, digital experts, and we're also global, which I personally love and also love about this community. It's great meeting people from all around the world and all those different cultures. And I think the best bit about Quadmark is that we're women-owned business, 100% owned by a wonderful woman called Helen Earle, who's also our CEO, and we are also women-led and certified by WeConnect. So yeah, I think that's very important. So on to today, the framework we're going to run through is basically based on a methodology from a book called Challenge Your Sale, and I'll explain more about that later. And I've got links to resources and references that I mention at the end of the slides. So when I share these out, you'll have all the links that you need. And as I say, we do a lot of training with large global sales teams, generally in the kind of multinational space, and we've been doing that for around 20 years. So during this session, I'm hoping to share some of that knowledge and that training that we've picked up along the way. And if all goes well, hopefully you'll leave this session and you'll have an understanding of what customers are looking for during the buying process. You'll learn a 7-step framework for deepening some of those customer pitch conversations, and you'll understand how to create a compelling story arc based on your own unique point of view. And I'll explain more what I mean by point of view a little bit later. So I said we were going to do some Slido. This is a bit out of my comfort zone for me. Normally I have a co-moderator from Quadmark who helps me with Slido because it can go a bit wrong. But if you could get your phones out and scan the QR code. I'm going to scan too, just to make sure it's working.
So I'm in and it says that there are no active polls at the moment.
Well, hopefully that's about to change. So we've got our first question.
Great.
Has that shown up? Yeah?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, that's test number 1. So who on the call enjoys selling?
We do.
Yeah, that's unusual. Oh, I've got the right people on the call.
I have a shop and I don't like it, and I don't like selling.
No.
No.
Well, I think if you ask, I'll just give it a couple of seconds. Wow, yes, we do have a lot of people. Oh no, there's some people who kind of depending on the client there. But I think for me, if you ask me if I like selling, I would probably say no. And if you ask me if I like being sold to, I'd also say no. But if you ask me if I like meeting people, that's definitely yes. And also when I meet people, I always want to know what's going on for them, understanding their challenges, and I always want to help. And I think so if you reframe it a little bit, actually, I really love helping clients overcome their challenges and building relationships. And that is really a kind of key part of selling. And so hopefully we're going to talk about some of that today. So it doesn't feels a bit less like selling and a bit more about helping people overcome some of those challenges and adding value. Okay, so we're going to try second Slido. I need you to write your words individually and then submit, because if you put 3 words in all together, it all comes in one sentence. And if this works, we're going to create a beautiful word cloud. So please use 3 words to describe what customers are, what you think customers are looking for from your pitch. This one might take a couple of minutes to do. I'm challenging everybody's typing skills. Don't worry if there's some typos in there. I know it can be quite tricky when you're under pressure. Okay. Some eyes down. I'm going to give you a 2-second warning, and then hopefully I'm going to go onto the is this good? I think with this one it can sometimes be a bit problematic and I have to go back. Yes, there we go. Oh yes, value, solutions, understanding, experience, honesty, very important. Truth, unique, yep, we'll talk about that as well. Solve challenges, transparency. Yeah, no, some really good answers in there. Okay, so I think as we can all agree, selling and generating new business is definitely a huge challenge. And I think part of that challenge is that also customers' expectations are increasing. I mean, just in that simple word cloud, you saw a lot of your feedback in terms of what you're experiencing. And if you're not aware, Salesforce do a really good report at the end of the year where they look at the state of selling. And so the stats that I've got here, and again, I'll link to, they're from that report. And it's really interesting, especially as you start to look at that report over time. I think if you're pitching to large corporations in particular, it can really help explain what's going on in the world for those people who are buying your services. So from that research, Salesforce tells us that 81% of buyers conduct research. And I think we all know that, but I think what we can take.
Vale.
Claro, claro. Yo pensaba, claro, sí, sí, yo los utilizo.
Okay, I'll just wait for that one to mute. So what we can say is that actually the people that we are selling to, they're going to be well informed. They're often contacting the businesses and suppliers they want to work with much later in the sales cycle, and they're spending a lot of less time with BD or sales representatives. When buyers do have conversations, they already have a really good understanding of what's available in the market. So in that word cloud, when we're talking about unique, that's really important. So if you're not prepared for a well-informed buyer, you're going to lose credibility. And it's so important in this market to be credible, as we can see that the buyers are doing so much more research. I saw trust as well in the word cloud, which is great. In the same survey, it states that 87% of business buyers expect the salesperson that they're speaking to act as a trusted advisor. So we know that the customer is going to be really well informed, but I think we all know, I've been recently trying to book a holiday, you can get really overwhelmed with all the information out there. So that trust aspect and having a salesperson who's going to help guide you rather than overwhelm you with information is also really important. They're looking for somebody to consult on the best way forward. And then finally, from the same report, rapport is also really important. And I find this quite surprising, especially from a marketing background. And it does make a lot of sense, but 53% of customer loyalty is driven by the sales experience. So that's not our beautiful looking brands. It's not the price that we scope our products, or even some of the service. A lot of it is part of that sales cycle. So just to kind of re-emphasize how important it is to get this right. So what does this mean for you when you're engaging with customers? It sounds very obvious, but it's so important to do your research. And sometimes we get really busy. Those requests come in last minute. We might have to jump on a call with a prospective client or a procurement team. But it is so important. And we went through a rebrand, and I actually had a terrible experience with a very well-known, credible brand agency who joined the call and thought we were an educational institution. Hadn't read the brief. They were the front runner to get the rebrand work that we wanted to do. And by the second call, we'd ruled them out because they hadn't done the research. So it's still, as crazy as it sounds, it still happens. And I've spent a lot of time with procurement teams recently. I've been working on a project with WeConnect, and the procurement teams that I was speaking to were saying that things that stand out to them when they speak to different suppliers are people that speak their language and understand their world. And as basic as that sounds, it really stands out to that procurement team. They also talk about tailoring your pitch so that way it resonates with the client's big challenges. And I'm sure you found from your own conversations and definitely running businesses, there's a lot of big challenges out there right now, whether it's responding to climate change, staying relevant with ESG to make sure that you can still access markets. There's L&D in the UK. We've still got the fallout from Brexit, AI, multi-generational workforces. It is a really complex business ecosystem out there. And it's really important that we understand that world, because that's the world that the buyers that we work with are dealing with on a daily basis. Secondly, customers are really looking to add value to the sales conversation. So back to this consult point, and that emphasizes what the sales force research says. So they're seeking out sellers that teach them something new. Clients recognize that they don't have all the answers, but they really want to work with those experts who are going to help guide them to the answers. And finally, customers are looking to have a two-way conversation. They do want you to challenge them on their thinking around the problem and guide them to the solution that most succeeds. So where does this framework that I've mentioned at the beginning come in? Basically, Matt Dixon and a guy called Brent Adamson, they wrote a book. It was a while ago, but they interviewed around 6,000 salespeople and 90 companies. And again, it was across the globe, so it's a global view. And they really determined that a successful sales approach conducted of 3 things. And lucky for us, they made it really catchy and they gave us a 3 T's approach. And then they created this story arc, which I'll talk to you about very shortly. So like all frameworks, it might not be relevant to all situations, but I think what I'd like you to take out of this session and what worked for me when I first learned about this framework was that it just provoked some interesting ideas. It also made me reflect on my own sales style and kind of where I was strong and where I wasn't so strong, and I had some development areas. I just think it's quite easy to learn, which is always very helpful. Although their research was quite old, the Salesforce data that I've just run through still backs up a lot of the thinking of the book. So some of that thinking is still very relevant because I often get asked that question. So the first T in the 3 T's is teaching customers something new and valuable about how to compete in the market. The second T is that successful salespeople, they tailor their sales pitch to resonate with the big decision makers' big issues. And the third one is that they take control of the conversation. And the book goes into lots of details about these 3 T's, about the story arc we're going to talk about, but also about different sales personas, coaching sales teams, etc. It's a great read. So again, it's linked at the back. I promise I'm not on commission for these authors. So the focus of this rest of the session is really going to be on the components of how to build this best-in-class pitch. So let's take a look at this story arc. So before we go through each of the individual steps, I think one thing for me that's really important about this is that it is storytelling. And it's not storytelling in a fictional way where we make up the facts and the insights. But if you think about maybe some of your own personal experiences and even just humans in general, we've been using stories to educate, inspire, create our cultures for like tens of thousands of years. And I think sometimes, even today, I will be presented to by a company that's trying to sell us their service, and they're presenting their solution and facts and figures in a way that's not relevant for me and definitely doesn't tell a memorable story. So yeah, I think it's really important that when we do have these conversations with prospective buyers, we are tapping into that kind of human instinct of storytelling. So let's go into the detail. So the 7-step process, we're going to take our customers on a journey. And if you think about a good story, whether that's a book or a film, we often start off in quite a nice, neutral, safe place. There might even be a kind of optimistic peak, and then often there's a little bit of a trough before we come out of that trough. And that's the kind of journey we want to take these customers on. So first, we're going to build your credibility. We're going to introduce a point of view, and then we're going to look at a new insight. So that way we can prove our insight with data. And we'll go through each of these steps in more detail, very individually. I'm just trying to give you a sense of the whole story. Next, once we want to tell the human story behind the impact. So what's at risk for the individual that we're talking to or the organization if they don't take action? And if you think about films or stories, this is the lowest part of this storytelling journey before we show the customer that there's a new way forward. And we do that by introducing a generic solution. And we do that before we even talk about ourselves and our business. And I'll explain why when we get to that step in more detail. And then once we've introduced the generic solution, we can then start to talk about why we as a business are uniquely placed to overcome the challenge that we've identified or they've identified. We've introduced a 7th step when we run through this training, which isn't covered in the Challenger Sales book, but we believe is crucial. And that one is next steps. So here we're thinking about what the call to action is for the customer and what it is that we want to do next. So I'm going to start at stage 7, and I promise you this isn't a mistake. I didn't get my slides in a muddle here. The reason we start here is because it's really beneficial to have the start in mind. And why do we start here? Because we want to have a goal. And so if we can build the rest of the pitch to help us move towards that goal, then that's going to be really effective when we're talking to the buyer. And if you think about earlier, I was talking about my own reflections in terms of my sales style, and this is definitely one area I'm guilty of not doing. And I still sometimes find it hard to do today. And it's not so much the goal setting, it's some of those kind of call to actions and assumptive close. Going to basically get the client to either come back to us with a next step or that we're asking them for something at this part in the process. And I'll run through some of those examples in a second. But as we heard earlier, it's really important to guide our customers. So I think at this stage, we really want to think about the action that we want to happen. So what do we want to happen as a result of this meeting? Is it another meeting? What is the goal of purpose of that meeting? Because I think also as a buyer, if you say, let's have another meeting, I'd instantly be thinking, why? So I think if you are requesting a meeting, think about the goal or the purpose for that follow-up meeting. Think about the close. How can you get this client to agree? And admittedly, there's often decision-making processes that happen outside of the face-to-face meeting or the call or the email that you might be having with the client. But is there anything that you can do as part of this pitch which moves that client closer to an agreement? And then also committing. So can you get the client to indicate their commitment at this moment, whether it's to sign on the line or raise a PO? So let's have a look at some of those kind of different closing techniques. Again, I'll share the slides so you can have some of these examples. I'd also really suggest Google and ChatGPT. Don't know if anybody's using ChatGPT. It's a legend, especially if you've got some writer's block. They're great at providing a whole host of closing techniques. But yeah, I mean, just a few examples, and I'd love to see any examples that you've got in the chat. But I think there's lots of different styles. So we've just put 4 in here. So if you think about the assumptive close avoids phrases like if or shall we, and it's more assertive. And again, it's pushing that client to show commitment or take action. So it could be, how shall we get started, or when shall we get started? So again, trying to get an answer from that client that moves this process forward in some way. You could have something like the question close, which puts the ball in their court and brings them back into discussion. So what do you think the next steps are? Could be a question that you ask the client to try and get them to commit. The one that there's time limited, there's bonus closes, etc. One that I personally find really helpful is that I can present to a client on a call or face-to-face, and sometimes I don't get any feedback. And I recently had this on a pitch, and it was really hard for me to tell how this pitch went because the clients were completely silent. And I was good, and I'd already gone in there with my close. And so my final question to them was actually, based on what we've discussed, do you feel our products or services meet your needs? And we'd gone from this point where we thought we weren't sure how we'd performed. We weren't sure if what we were saying was resonating. Most people looked like they were checking their emails. And then all of a sudden, the client came off mute and they said, yep, we're really impressed. You've thought about things that we hadn't thought about. We had done, I'll talk about it a bit later, we'd done a mystery shop. And all of a sudden, from asking that one question, and we were so close to the call ending, we engaged in a conversation with the client. We got immediate feedback to know that even if we didn't win the work, that it went well. But it also led to an opportunity for that client to connect with different members of the pitch team who had done some of the research work and were based, it was in Scotland, they were based in the locale of that client. So it was really, yeah, for me, it showed the importance of why we need to use these closes. And we won the work, which is always really good. So yeah, after this session, I'd urge you experiment. Keep a list of lines in a notes doc somewhere. Maybe take some of these lines, and yeah, if there's any useful, I can't see the chat, but if there's anything useful coming up in the chat for you, but definitely, yeah, reuse those in your conversations. So we now understand what we want to achieve. We've thought about some of those closing techniques. So we're back at step one, and step one is all about building credibility. So it's common approach for the sales process to get the customer to start doing the work. And I think we can all be guilty of this. You go in there and you ask the client kind of what are the challenges that they're facing or the problems they're trying to overcome. And there's nothing wrong with that. But really, if you're thinking about these kind of challenger personas, they look to change the nature of the sales call. So rather than leading with questions, you lead with your understanding and knowledge so that the prospect immediately feels that they're not wasting their time. And I'll give you some examples so you can kind of understand what we mean. And the reason we do this is because it builds credibility. Back to that research point, in the first kind of 5 seconds of conversation, you can show the customer that you've done your homework. You can show that you've understood the customer's needs. It means that it doesn't mean that you can't ask questions because you want it to be engaging, but it just means that instantly you've grabbed their attention. So for example, rather than going in there and saying, what is your biggest challenges, which seems like a very normal opening question, you could start the conversation by saying, in my experience working with companies in your sector, I've noticed, insert common challenge. How does your current company currently address this? And to do this, you really need to understand the client, their objectives, which you can find so much about these clients in their media releases, in their financial and annual reports. And again, ChatGPT is really being brilliant. Some of the stats aren't great on there, but you can just get a sense of what's going on, especially with these very large multinational organizations. But
Sorry,
yeah,
Laura, if I can interrupt you, we have a question in the chat from Ria. I don't know, Ria, if you want to unmute yourself, or I can read the question out loud for you.
Yeah, of course I can unmute myself. Hey, I just had a very quick question on the previous slide that you mentioned, personalizing your pitch based on your client or your prospect or whatever. In the past, when we've done such deliveries, we've realized that sometimes prospects do not want to go ahead with us. It could be for various reasons, could be for cost, could be for whatever they tell us. But then we've noticed that they've gone ahead and implemented the changes we've recommended. So what we started doing is not personalizing our pitch to that much of a detail level. Have you been through this scenario yourself, or what would your recommendation be?
So my recommendation would be, and we come to it a little bit at the end, where we talk about generic solutions. So I think in that situation, because everything that we do was bespoke, the solution was often in our pitch. And so now as a business, we will often put ideas into the pitch, but as part of our kind of, we have something called the method, which shows you how like we understand the client, etc. We will often scope a discovery process and solution writing part as part of the pitch. So you want to put enough ideas into the pitch, and this generic solution and then who you are might help that with that, without putting the entire solution in there. And you could even put as part of your scoping next steps, actually there's a stage of discovery, so you can really understand the brief, interrogate it, speak to the subject matter experts within that client organization, and then you would come back with a full solution. The challenging part is then quoting, because you need to quote for the work, so that way they can raise the purchase orders, and they don't like it when those quotes differ. But then that just sets you a boundary and a parameter, really, in order to quote what the like detailed solution should be.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I hope that's helpful. So yeah, back to some of I'll just give a couple of examples and then we'll move on to the next step. So back to, so thinking about the knowledge that you have, you could put stats into this attention grabbing sentence. And I think it's also important to think about your motivation as an individual and a business. So you might be drawn to a client or to a particular project because you think you're uniquely placed to serve that client, or it's just an opportunity of growth for your business. So really think about that motivation. So some lines and some examples that I have just to kind of bring this to life. It could be that you're speaking to a global client that's launching in new markets. And so rather than saying, what's your challenge? You could say, oh, I understand. I read that annual report, or I saw that media press release, and I understand your top priority is to launch in new markets. We found this a challenge working in the UK. How are you finding it? And again, it's just one sentence. It takes less than a minute, but you're just building that credibility and kind of, I guess, name dropping your research about that company, as well as reassuring them that you're the right people to talk to. Another example might be many businesses like yours are really struggling with knowing how to adopt AI. We were working with a client last week who's had some great success rolling out AI to improve their sales performance. Yeah, how are you finding it? And again, you've told them that you've done your research, you've put your credibility in there, and then you're opening up them to tell you the details, so that way you're not operating based on assumptions. Okay, so we've got their attention. The next section is all about introducing your POV, and I have to say this is a bit of this one's a toughie. So in the second stage, you are really building on the challenges that your customer just shared, and you really want to reframe the status quo, i.e. like the way that they're attacking that problem today, and why that might not be working. So if we are going at this from a challenger perspective, come prepared to describe why and how the problem the customer is currently experiencing is connected to a larger, perhaps even more troubling issue, or on a positive scale, perhaps a more opportunistic, I'm not sure I say that right, issue than they realised. And what we're really hoping to do is ideally make them aware of something that they hadn't really thought about, something that's surprising, and that's causing a pain point for their business. So to make this really simple, if you think about in a B2C world, maybe there's a customer taking paracetamol, and for back pain, actually a challenger salesperson wouldn't say, yeah, here you go, I'm going to sell you more paracetamol, or I'm going to sell you this different type of brand. They would look at that individual and they would approach it by finding the source of that back pain. And perhaps they're sitting on an uncomfortable office chair, or they need a new bed mattress. And so rather than going in with the very obvious solution, they would go in with the best solution that solves the problem. So, as I said, it is hard, and it requires a lot of thinking to think about these POVs, and it's often where we as a business spend a lot of time in terms of preparing for the pitches that we have with clients. And I personally, in the UK, I love watching architecture TV shows. If there's anybody in the UK, Grand Designs, George's Ugly Homes to Beautiful Homes are definitely some favourites of mine. And I think what's really interesting, yeah, I could see some thumbs up. I think what's really interesting about those TV programs is that architects often talk about how the most challenging plots or challenging client briefs or budgets actually lead to the most creative solution. And that's really that kind of spirit and ethos that you're trying to adopt for the POV. So it's all about embracing the challenge the client faces, so that way later on you can sell that really creative solution that sets you apart from your competition, that the client hasn't thought about, and that gets them to kind of like have that aha moment, really. And when you're thinking about these POVs and how to develop them, you're really trying to think about what your customer hasn't thought about, what they might have thought about, but not through your lens or their customer lens. You're thinking about what information haven't they connected, and you're trying to put all of that together to figure out, is it hindering their strategy? Does it impact them financially, etc., etc. So again, to kind of bring this to life, I work often with HR clients. Sometimes you have conversations about kind of disengagement with employees and they're looking for training programs. So if I was speaking to a HR person, maybe they're telling me that actually they think it's all to do with monetary motivation. So I could say to that client, you currently believe that salary and bonuses are the key drivers of employee disengagement. Actually, when Quadmark delve deeper into this, we find employee satisfaction is often linked to demotivation because of lack of recognition and personal goals. And if I had third-party data to back that up, I could also add that into the equation. So the client believes, well, the problem is employees are disengaged. The client believes that's all to do with monetary kind of salary and bonuses. But in this imaginary case study, Quadmark have done their research. They've reviewed the client source information. We've gone out to third parties, our own experience working with clients, and actually we believe the source of the problem might not be that. And so we challenge the client's original perspective, but only if that challenge adds value and is correct. You don't challenge for challenging's sake, if that makes sense. So, and I guess to bring it to life a bit more, in our business, we often ask a client who want a specific assets. So they'll say, create me an e-learning program. And you're like, well, all your people are on the shop floor and they haven't got any devices to access e-learning. So actually that approach isn't going to work. So we would challenge them and we would suggest an alternative perspective, which would still meet the client goal, but have a better outcome in our opinion. And we've even been in situations where it might mean that we say no to the business because we believe it's the right thing to do. We don't believe it's the right thing to do to waste the client's money to go down an avenue where we don't think it's going to be effective. So that's the POV. The next stage is all about quantifying the impact. So you've challenged that perspective and now it's really about showing the impact. So you want to prove that insight's true, you want to bring in that third-party data. It could be numbers. So in the case of the shop and the e-learning, you could say, actually, if you do e-learning, they're not going to learn it or be able to access it, which means that your product is going to have fewer sales. And ideally, if I could quantify loss of sales, or we sometimes go from the positive perspective. We believe this training program will generate a 5% uplift in sales. And yeah, that would result in this positive experience. But yeah, you're really trying to use the financial data to back up your point of view and just to help the customer, I guess, to feel some of the pain of staying in the same place. So trying to get them to shift from their status quo. And we use the word overwhelm at this stage. Challenger uses the word rational drowning. As we discussed at the start, customers do their own research and are overwhelmed with information. So this step is not about overwhelming a client so much that it leads to decision paralysis or a sense of confusion. And we don't want to be manipulative at this stage either. So an example might be, we could say to the client, as over the past year, our clients in your industry have experienced an average cost increase of 30% due to outdated technology. if we were a technology provider, for example. Or we could say 60%, if you work in marketing and you're a marketing agency, the stat might be something like 60% of businesses like yours are relying on outdated marketing strategies that are delivering diminishing returns. But yeah, at this stage, we kind of want to quantify the impact of what could happen if they don't take action. Again, pushing them, nudging them nicely to take some of that action. The next stage, you've built the rational argument, so now you want to build the emotional impact of a problem. And you do this by creating a narrative that looks familiar and shows customers how companies similar to their own are suffering because of behaviours they recognise and because of commitment to the status quo. So this could be thinking about that kind of HR world, that actually the constant overtime and stress your team endures due to manual processes are taking a toll. It's not just about efficiency, it's about their well-being. It could be something like, let me share a recent story from one of our clients who faced similar challenges. The emotional toll it took on their organisation was palpable, and it's something we're committed to helping you avoid. And again, at this point, I have to stress it's not about emotional manipulation or aggressive selling. So the examples that you should use should be based on your experience and knowledge. So yeah, at the beginning, I was talking about the client that we recently pitched for. So it was in a sector that we didn't have a lot of experience. We had the training knowledge and expertise. We knew that we could do it. And so we engaged one of our employees to go and do a mystery shop of the environment that they worked in. And from that mystery shop, we then had data, and we could also tell human stories. So within our pitch, we were able to say, actually, we went to the venue that you really want us to do this training on. It was generally pretty good and a great experience, but you missed these opportunities. And one of those opportunities was to guide people into the retail area where they would buy the product. And so instantly you could then start to quantify that as being actually you're going to be losing sales, and you're losing the opportunity for people to engage with your product. They might leave the venue, not buy your product, and then actually you've missed an opportunity for them to engage with your brand and become a lifelong fan of whatever it is that you're selling. So that was really impactful. And again, it also got that client asking us lots of questions at the end of the pitch about the negatives of that experience, because they were keen to improve. So it is very important, and it does work. Okay, hang on with me. We're almost there. We're now at stage 5. And at this point, it can be tempting to introduce your solution. But we introduce the generic solution for a reason. And that's because you're sometimes challenging the status quo. So you really want the client to buy into whatever you're suggesting being the right answer before you then bring in your business and why you are the people that they should hire to work with. So at this stage, you want to explain the solution, but you want to make it generic. The customer should understand how effective the solution is at solving their challenges or answering the brief. And it could be explaining what's available in the industry today. You could acknowledge what's out there and even some of your competitors. And you're just showing confidence really in your product and service, that actually you're acknowledging that they probably are aware of some of these solutions. Before you then explain why you're the right people. So the training we do is bespoke. We're often, you could go to generic training solutions, or you could go to Coursera or one of these kind of e-learning platforms. So at this stage, we might suggest actually you could go to Coursera, you can have these off-the-shelf solutions, but then when we go into the next step, we would start to explain why we're different and why actually going bespoke is the way to do this. So the point that we've all been waiting for, stage 6, we finally get to talk about ourselves, our businesses, all that passion that we've been saving up throughout this pitch. And here you want to introduce your solution. You want to say why it's unique, what your differentiators are. You want to provide your customers with the understanding that the service you'll provide will exceed their expectations or help them knock out that status quo. And yeah, you want to make sure that your product is seen at this stage as a standout solution. So this is where you're going to talk about your value proposition. You're going to be prepared to mention credentials such as awards, feedback, existing clients, case studies, results, etc. And I think this is often the bit that we're often the most comfortable with. And again, if you're still trying to figure out your value proposition, there's a brilliant guy on LinkedIn. He's got a website too. He's called Alex Smith. I've linked to his material because he's got some really great thinking in terms of brand positioning and how to stand out. So I definitely recommend him. So we've now gotten to the end of our 7 steps. Again, thank you for all your patience and your energy so far. So a quick recap and then we'll do any final questions. So remember, you want to take your customer on a journey. You're going to build your credibility, introduce your point of view. You're going to back that point of view with a new insight. You're going to prove your insight with some of that data. Then you're going to tell the human story behind that impact. What's at risk if they don't take action? And then you're going to show the customer that there's a new way forward by introducing the generic solution. And please don't skip that step. I know it's very tempting. You don't have to call out your competitors if that feels scary, but yeah, that introducing a generic solution is really important. And it's not your solution, so it does need to be objective. And then you're going to introduce your solution, why it's uniquely placed to overcome the challenge. And then you've already prepped it at the very beginning. You're going to have that call to action ready to go for that customer, and you're going to nudge them to hopefully not ghost you after you've spent all this time and effort creating these pitch proposals. So as I said, I'll share these slides. They'll have the links and resources that you need. We've also got a download of the pitch builder on our website, so I'll share a link to that, and that helps you. It's basically like a worksheet. It explains all the process, all the steps, gives you examples. That way you can work through it for your business. And as I said at the start of this, it's just a framework. You don't like, I personally find it effective when I follow the 7 steps, but really if this is very different to the way that you start today, maybe try 1 or 2 different steps, maybe try thinking about those closing techniques. But yeah, I guess experiment with it, see what works for you. Every client brief is unique, and so yeah, just adapt, play around. And go check out ChatGPT too. Okay, any questions? I can see there's like lots of chat, but I've not gone into the chat section.
No worries, I got you. Thank you, Laura, so much. It was really insightful. Now I'm really excited to see each pitch at the conference in Paris to see if you applied any tips. There is one question about the book that you just mentioned about helping your brand stand out, but I'm not sure if that's in the list you have in the last slide. Okay.
Yeah, I'll link that in the resources.
Okay, great. There are a lot of positive answers here in the chat. This is all very helpful. I love your unique approach. I'm not sure if there's any question, if somebody would like to unmute.
Oh, Alison's hand up. Hi, Alison.
Hey, Laura, how are you? Yeah,
I'm
thanks for that. It's great. Really, really clear and super useful. I just had a question about when you use this, because I think one of the things that you mentioned at the beginning is that you know, you'd usually want to ask client questions about their business. And I assume that's kind of in a sales conversation where you might be wanting to find out more about their business so you can write a proposal. So this model is like really when you're pitching, you're standing up in front of them, or you have a solution. Like what stage in the sales process is this for?
think it can vary. So if you think about the arc, actually stages 1, where you're trying to get their attention and demonstrate your expertise, but also gain knowledge, that can sometimes happen outside of the main pitch. So for example, with an RFP, we'll often receive the brief, it's by email, we haven't had a chance to speak to somebody, but if you're going back with emails, or if you do have a meeting to ask questions, you can demonstrate that you've done your research, that you can do the kind of, actually, when we've worked with other clients, they've had these issues, do you have these issues? So I think sometimes step 1 can happen outside of the pitch, but when you go, like if you take that RFP example, so all that kind of research questions are happening before you're actually on the video call or in the room with the client. What we would always do is still bring in some of that data from step 1 and from that kind of data gathering part of the process into the pitch. So yeah, again, kind of just, I guess, repeat and build some of that credibility at that stage. And you might not necessarily be asking questions because the client's already asked all those questions as part of the RFP they published. Does that make sense?
It does. Sorry, just a quick follow-up question. So this is kind of alongside the proposal. So you may have before you submit a proposal or you're doing a pitch, you may have had conversations with the client to kind of gather some of the information and the solution that you propose. And then when you're kind of presenting your solution, you would do all of this before you present your final solution.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Okay.
And I think this story arc's really flexible. Like this story arc, you could, thinking about Paris, I'm on the app figuring out who I'm going to go and talk to. I know which company they work for, I know which role. And so I can do my research before I have that meeting, and I can go through this story arc in a conversation style that might take 5 or 10 minutes in a very natural way. But then I can also apply this arc to a full proposal when pitching to a client that might be an hour-long session. So I do think it's flexible.
Right, as we don't have much time left, only 4 minutes, maybe we can stick to maximum 2 questions. I can
Yep.
see a question from Fanny. How do you maintain a follow-up with your potential customer?
So I think it's back to those closing techniques. I found that they really
Yes,
do.
absolutely. I'm regarding, yeah, that's regarding the next steps and close, and was wondering how you maintain a follow-up, and what's best, what's the best approach to maintain a follow-up without being, too offering, or is there any specific technique?
So I think be
for that?
persistent, and often, I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes so we'll do the proposal, and the bit that I kind of say sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't is in that kind of follow-up email stage after you're waiting to hear where you've won the work. So I think be persistent. We often chase people 5 or 6 times for an answer.
5 or
Yeah.
6 times? I would have thought 3 times, because I know that the procurement professionals are really busy. They get a lot of emails. They have high top priorities to
No, there's research out
deal.
there.
So 5 to 6 is not
Yeah.
too much.
No.
Okay.
I think, but it's all, think about the emails that you're sending them. So you can do it in a way that is adding value to that person. It could be, I saw this research report, or I saw this media announcement about you, and have you made a decision? Is there anything stopping you making a decision that I can jump on another call with you to discuss? So I think don't send the same email 5 or 6 times, but think about how you can add value to each of those emails.
Okay.
You do have to send a lot of emails to get a response sometimes.
Thank you.
The thing that we've started doing is asking at the beginning of an RFP, are you going to give us feedback, even if we're unsuccessful? Because then you'll get a sense as well about the kind of procurement standards. And then you can go back and say, you said you would give me feedback, whether it's a no or a yes. Please can I have my feedback?
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Fantastic.
Also,
Just
Amanda,
maybe,
the question. Oh, yeah.
no, it's-
You can go, Beatrice, maybe.
yeah, just maybe you already talked about that. Just want to know what's the ideal time to present a pitch that is really effective. I guess not very long. How many minutes do you consider is the ideal?
I don't think there's an answer to that question. So I think it all depends on the client, the brief, what's being asked for. With some of our, I always find 30 minutes is too short because often we've got quite complicated training programs. I think if you've got a simpler product to sell, then the shorter the better. But yeah, I think for me, it's not so much the time, it's the structure. So it's making time for
Structure. How much
interaction.
time we will have actually in Paris to do our pitches?
Oh, we've got 3 minutes if you're pitching in a wide to the wide audience, and then I'm not sure how long the
Okay,
maximum.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Not much.
And again, there's some of this might be a bit harder to do that. I'm pitching as well, but I would take elements of this. I might not be able to do all of it because I need to pitch to a really wide audience. And so yeah, how you do that and speak, you have to speak to generic pain points across businesses and buyers in general. So it's definitely, yeah, it's a harder brief.
is.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Right. There are many more questions, but I can send you the meeting chat, Laura, in case you would like to follow up
Yeah.
with it.
I can answer the chat questions. I'm also happy to hang on for 5 minutes to answer any other questions that anybody wants to stay on and have answered.
Great. So I'll stop the recording now. I will send you the slides from Laura, also the recording link. And Laura, we thank you so much for doing this. I really
Oh.
think you also helped so many people that are preparing for the conference. So this was really valuable. Thank you.
And please, I've got one final QR code. I'd really love to know what you thought of the session. Maybe we can share the link in the email with the slides as well. But yeah, we always try and improve everything that we do. So feedback to us is really important.